Hey everyone, it's Daphne from Scrap and Create. Today I'm going to work on building a base album so that we'll have a good reference whenever we're doing an 8.5 by 10.5 mini album. So let's go ahead and get started. So what you're going to need are a couple of things. You're going to need some glue. I always like to keep my ruler, and I use this to do some trimming of the larger papers. You're going to need a pair of scissors. I like to use my X-Acto knife when I'm trimming the cover for my album. Bone folder, some score tape, and then what we're going to build is an 8.5 by 10.5 album. And this is what the album is going to look like when we're done. We'll have 4 sheets, and then we'll also have the cover and the hinges will be installed. So that's what we're aiming for. So I did some pre-cutting and some preparation work, so this will go pretty quickly today. So you're going to need 2 pieces of chipboard, and I started with 8.5 by 11, and all I needed to do was trim a 1/2 inch off each of those, and then you'll need another scrap piece for 2.5 by 10.5 for the spine. So again, 8.5 by 10.5, you'll need 2 of those for the cover and for the back, and then 2.5 by 10.5. This is medium weight chipboard. And again, I started with 8.5 by 10.5. You're going to need 2 sheets of 12 by 12 black cardstock. And I've already taken, so this is the 12 by 12 cardstock. And I've taken 2 of these pieces and just glued them together in the middle. Actually, I used a piece of score tape to attach them. And I'm going to go over real quick how to do that. So I've mentioned this in other videos, but I'm going to go over it again. Paper has a grain, and the way to find the grain, and you're going to want to score your cover going with the grain, and that'll go a long way to prohibiting or preventing cracking of your spine. So the way to find it is if you're handling your paper and you try to fold it over on itself, you can feel some resistance. And if you turn it and try to fold it the other way and it goes smoother, that's with the grain. So this is the grain, and it's even easy to see how I'm handling it, how it wants to fold up. When I go this way, there's a lot more resistance. It just wants to pretty much stay flat in my hands. I turn it this way and it creates an I'm not even pushing it. It just falls into a valley. So that's how you know the grain of your paper. That is the orientation you want your paper to lay down in when you're building your book. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is, this is the grain, so I want my spine to go this way, not this way. And that way my score lines around my spine will be in line with the grain of the paper. And like I said, that'll go a long way to toward keeping your spine from cracking, okay? All right, so now I've got my 2 12 by 12 pieces adhered together, and I just did that with a 3/8 inch of score tape, ran it down, overlapped it, try to keep it as straight as possible. It is going to have some trimming, so it's not critical, but it's nice to have it as straight as possible while you're working with it. So I'm just going to put a couple of dots here and make another quick reference line. And again, this is just to get the chipboard pieces laid down in as straight a line as possible. Did I get that in right? Let's see. 3/4 of an inch. And that's a little low, so we'll go up just a little bit. And that looks pretty good. All right, there we go. Quick line. So I'm going to use that to line my pieces off of. So I'm going to dry fit real quick. What does dry fit mean? It means there's no glue or tape on anything, so I can shuffle them around, make sure I like the way everything is looking. So my margins on the top and the bottom look pretty good based on my second reference line. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now the other thing I want to make sure I have is is a small jig, and this is made out of chipboard, and it's 2 layers. And I'm going to use that as my spacer between my spine and my covers. So if you don't have one, you can either stack two together and hold them, but I've just glued these two pieces of scraps together, and I've saved it, and I use it over and over again. So again, it's whatever size chipboard or thickness chipboard that you're using. You want 2 layers of that, either held or glued together, to use as your tool for spacing. So make sure you have that handy. Okay, based on that, and based on what I see here, everything looks pretty good. So I'm going to start putting some tape and glue or tape down to get ready to lay these down permanently. Okay, and that'll go pretty quickly. Now the spine, and especially the edges closest to the hinge of the cover, get a lot of activity. So don't go light on your adhesives. You know, make sure you're using plenty of adhesive in those spaces, and you'll be happy in the end. Otherwise, you could wind up with some bubbling here where the paper's pulling away from the chipboard. Okay, so I'm going to frame this out with score tape, and then I'm going to use my tape glider to fill in the center. And part of the reason I do that is I really like my my score tape, but it is kind of expensive. So using the ATG is helpful. But the other reason I do it this way is I'm left-handed, and the way the tape runner loads, it loads to the right. So I actually have to kind of crank around to see where the tape is being laid down. So if I need precision, I typically use my tape, score tape, because I can see where I'm going. Okay, well, I'm going to take the tape off. We'll fill in the rest and then get this piece laid down. Okay, and again, this is the base for an 8.5 by 10.5. The pocket pages inside are actually going to be 8 by 10. But the album itself, the outside dimensions are 8.5 by 10.5. Rotate that around. And the reason I chose this, my first mini album that I made that was similar to this dimension was, I'm going to put a little glue so I can slide it around until I'm happy with the placement. I actually did the outside measurements 9 by 10.5. And the pocket page was 8.5 by 10. And I realized when I was decorating the album, because oftentimes I'll use the 12 by 12 and the 8 by 8 collection from Graphic 45, that my 8 by 8 wouldn't cover the 8.5 inch wide page. I'd always have to have a little trim piece. So that's why I altered the size of the mini album, so that if I want to use 8 by 8, it fits neatly on the existing pocket page without even having to, having to stretch it, but I can trim it a little. Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm looking for my seam here, and I know my seam is off because the way that I've stacked the paper is like this. So the bottom piece of paper is a little to the left, and then overlaps just like this. So I'm looking for this line, the one that's on the bottom, which when the album is standing up will be the one that's revealed. So I just want to center that on my spine. So it won't look like I'm centering off this one. I'm actually centering off the line that's on the reverse side. And it looks like it's about here. It doesn't have to be perfect because it's going to get covered. That looks about right. And again, I've got some glue on here, so that gives me a few minutes to wiggle it around and make sure that I'm happy with it before I start pressing things into place. Now I'm going to check by adding my pieces this way to make sure that it continues a straight line and that I don't have it slightly skewed. I'm going to set these right next to each other just to make sure my line is vertical and straight, and it looks pretty darn good. So I'm going to press that into place. Okay, and I'm not going to worry about burnishing it on the other side until I get my other two pieces in. Okay, now we're going to start with the 8.5 by 10.5. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put tape, score tape around the edge, and then use my glue gun or tape glider to fill in the centers. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and do the next one while I've got the tape in my hand. Okay, and if you're wondering what I'm using to tear the tape, this is just a little square acrylic piece that that you find in the fabric section of your craft store, and I've just added a telephone, a mobile phone pop dot on the back just because it makes it easy to handle. But that's all that is. It's just a clear square, acrylic square. You could use even an acrylic stamp square if you wanted. I just like to have a straight edge. It makes it easy, and I also wind up tearing my tape very straight, which I like. Whenever I use my fingers, I find that I get kind of a messy edge, and then sometimes my corner's not completely covered. And it's important, especially when you're wrapping an album cover, to make sure that you get adhesive all the way to the corner. So that's all that is. It's just a handy tool. Any kind of a straight edge will work. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and burnish my my tape down so that when I'm pulling it up, when I'm pulling up the backing, it doesn't pull the tape up with it. It just takes the backing off. Okay. And if you go to our shop, www.scrap_n create, you can find score tape and also the glue, the art glitter glue that we just love. Both of those items are for sale in our shop, and if you buy from us, we really appreciate it. Those purchases go a long way to helping us pay for additional content that goes out on YouTube. So thanks again. If you haven't checked it out, please do. But if you have, thank you again for coming to our shop. All right, I'm going to get this off, and then I'm going to lay down my my tape runner and get this covered. And I'm not sure if you can see how I'm laying it down, but I'm putting it down pretty close to, you know, maybe less than a ½ inch apart. So it's a lot of tape. But it's really important because the covers get a lot of activity, and you don't want your wrap to pull off. As a rule of thumb, when I'm building and constructing albums, I consider the amount of interaction that the page is going to have, and then, you know, apply adhesive accordingly. So the more interaction, the more adhesive. If it's a fairly static page, you know, I don't go so crazy on the adhesives. All right. Okay, so I've got all my adhesives down. I'm getting ready to lay this down. Now this is where my my tool, my spacer, comes in. I'm going to want to place that directly against this edge and then bring this page in. And I've got it upside down just for demonstration purposes, like so. And I'm going to push this page, this cover, this chipboard, as tightly against the spine as I can, press it down, and then pull out my spacer. So that's where I'm headed. I'm going to shift this a little bit so I can... And if you put it in at an angle like this, none of the tape is touching it. So you can shift it around a little bit until you're ready to actually drop it in place. So now I'm looking for these two edges and these two edges, and you didn't see what I was pointing to at the top, but these two and the bottom. just to make sure that it looks square with the spine. And when it does, and I've got it pushed against the spine tightly, I'm going to go ahead and lay it down. And it's, oh, sorry, it was stuck to me. I'm going to try that one more time. Make sure everything's even. It looks really good. So I'm pressing that down, and then I'm going to take that out. So now I've got a nice even space between the spine and the cover. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm going to shift this over a little bit. And then when I'm finished, I'm going to turn the whole thing over, and we're going to do our burnishing. Okay, got my tape. Turn that around, get out of my own way. And that is the end of the tape runner. So that worked out perfect. I just got a little tab here I needed to pull off, but we did have enough tape for the cover, so that's good. The rest of the tape that I'll use will be score tape, because I'll need to have precise location. And like I said, because I'm left-handed, that's a real challenge for me with that gun. So perfect. Okay, so now we're going to just lay this down side by side, make sure it's going to draw a straight line. So I'm just looking at this line down here to make sure visually it is going to line up with this, and it does. I would just, if not, then I would want to kind of visually make my adjustments so that when I lay this down, I know if that line needs to be up, down, or slightly askew, but it looks perfect. So I'm getting my spacer. I'm going to flip my paper over, or my chipboard over. Press the tool against the spine as tight as possible. Lay down the chipboard, keeping it at an angle so the tape is not trying to grab yet. And now I'm just pushing against the spine piece and this spacer as tightly as I can, and as evenly top to bottom as I can. And laying it down, and there we are. So that is done. So if you look around the edges, you can see that the distance between here and here, and the top and the top of the chipboard and the top of the paper is pretty even, top and bottom. But we have a lot of excess here. Excuse me. So I'm going to trim this down just a little bit so that when I wrap it, I don't have so much excess paper here. And the way I do that is I just lay down my ruler. It's a metal ruler. And I just use it as a spacer. And I'm just going to, sorry, I'm having to adjust a few things. Use my X-Acto knife to trim it down that little bit. And then what happens is I wind up with a piece that's just a little over an inch wide. It's like 1 1/8 inches. And it just is easier to handle and takes a little less adhesive when you're wrapping it. And I try to be as neat as possible when I'm wrapping. I think the results, it makes the results a little bit nicer. But you also want to avoid any unnecessary bulk on the inside of your album. Okay, there we go. It's still a little wider than the sides, but a little easier to handle. I'm rotating it around to do just the same thing on this side. Okay. And this is just personal preference. This is really, you know, not necessary, but it's just the way I like to work. Okay, get my straight edge of my out of the way. Now I am going to take my bone folder and I'm going to trace around the edge of my chipboard. And this is just to start getting the grain of the paper to start behaving the way I want it to, because I know I'm going to fold it this way. So I'm just creating a little bit of a score line, just tracing the edge of the chipboard. Okay, going all the way around. All right, now the other thing we're going to need this spacer for is we're going to use this to provide a guide for mitering the corners. So when we trim the corner, we want to trim the corners so there's not unnecessary bulk when we wrap it. And by mitering the corners, it goes a long way toward achieving that. So it's important to have a certain amount of space between the corner of your chipboard and where you trim your craft paper or your cardstock. And the reason is that there's actually some height to this chipboard. So when you go to wrap it, if you miter directly on this corner, you'll find that that corner will be exposed. So again, what I do is I use my chipboard, which is double thick the chipboard itself. So I've got one layer here. This is 2 layers. I just lay it down in a miter, and I use this to establish my guide for mitering my corners. This will leave you sufficient paper to completely cover the corner of your album when you're wrapping it. Okay, and I'm just eyeballing it. All of this gets folded over, and then this gets covered anyway. So you're not going to really see you're going to see very, very little of the miter itself. So it's okay if they're not perfect triangles. The important thing is that you make sure to leave yourself that space between the corner of the chipboard and where you trim your cardstock. For some reason that word doesn't want to come to me today. All right, so this is where I use a ruler again and my straight edge just to go ahead and trim. Actually, I don't even need a ruler. I just use my straight edge to trim these. You can use your scissor. Precision isn't that significant because it's going to get folded and covered. Just stay away. If anything, if cut on the outside of the line, not the inside. It's better to have too much paper between, too much here and here than too little. And I've done that where I've not given myself enough space, gone to wrap the album, and what I found is I had an exposed chipboard corner, which doesn't look very nice. And it also is an opportunity to fray because you've got a loose paper in there, which is not good. And the way to cover it up is you can either add some paper before you glue your wrap down, or the other thing you can do is you can take a black marker and actually color in the corner of your chipboard. But again, you still have some loose paper, so there's a chance for it to get stuck on something. Grab and tear. All right, so we've traced the edges. We've trimmed our corners. Now we're going to start working up the paper. And I'm just pulling this up and working it using the heat from my fingers and that little bit of oil in my skin to help guide the paper. You shouldn't be in a rush here, otherwise you could wind up cracking your paper. When we're pulling it this way, remember we tested the grain of the paper and we decided the grain was going this way for the sake of the spine, but right now we're working against it. So this is where you want to be patient. If you fold it too fast and too hard without giving the grain a chance to adjust, you'll crack your paper. So one of the things I did not mention, and I'll mention it now, is this 65-pound paper. And I found that whenever I've gone heavier than 65 pounds, whenever you're scoring something completely over, like what we're doing for the purpose of wrapping this, it cracks. So I've not had good luck using heavier cardstock to do anything where I'm wrapping. So 65-pound is my rule of thumb. Lighter weight paper will cover even nicer. It might not hold up as well over time in the other areas of the book, but the thinner the paper, the easier it is to fold it over. So it's not the weight I would recommend for matting your photos, but for interactive pieces like the spine and the hinges and stuff like that, I think 65-pound is the way to go. And that is some experience of working with lots and lots of mini albums and trying different things. Okay, so now I've worked these into place. I'm going to roll it over on itself. Pushing, pushing, pushing. Okay, I'm rotating it, doing the same thing. Pushing, pushing, pushing. Okay, now I'm going to flatten it out, and we're going to go ahead and apply our score tape. We're going to get ready to actually lay this down. So the way I apply score tape, this is pieces that you do not want to be moving around on you. So I apply it to the cardstock itself, right along the edge, and then I come back and apply it to the edge of the chipboard as well. So you'll see there's a gap here, but I'm going to apply my tape right here, so when I fold it over, there'll be tape all the way, the whole width of this flap. Hopefully that makes sense. But it's easier for me to apply it to the chipboard here than to try to apply a second strip of tape underneath the first one. Okay. Since I started, I'm going to go ahead and rotate it around and get the tape on the other side as well.
Flatten out a little bit.
And let's go ahead and do these other ends too. And then I can set my tape aside. All right, moving right along. So once this is done, our next step is going to be working on the spine, or not the spine, I'm sorry, the hinge that attaches to the spine. And it is a what's called a hidden hinge. And I'll go over how to score and tape that together and apply it to the book. And all my books and all my tutorials are based on the same technique that I'm using right now. So the size may vary, but the overall techniques are the same. I always use a hidden hinge. I always build a pocket page. So you can adjust your measurements, but it's pretty much going to be the same process. Not pretty much, it's exactly the same process. It's just, you can just vary the sizes. So, so we're ready to start wrapping this now. And I am going to pull my tape off and get started doing that. Nice long piece of tape. So you always want to start in the center and work your way out. If you have any excess paper, you want to work it out, not toward the spine. And when I say excess, I mean if it starts to slant or if you get a curve. Paper, does not always stay square on you. For the most part it will, but like I said, you don't want to have like any extra paper in toward the spine, especially right here where the hinge is. Okay, so I'm going to push that forward. I'm pushing, I'm laying it down and pushing as hard as I can upward. Okay, just going to use this to make sure I got everything down. Burnish, burnish. Looks good. Pressing down right here where it tends to want to bubble a little bit. And I get the corners down. Okay, I'm going to rotate it around and we're going to do the same thing. All right, again, we're going to start in the center. Push up and over. Up and over, up and over. Come back and burnish all the way. Make sure you got a good tight seal. All right, that's down. Okay, now we're gonna pause for a second and I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about the corners. And I'm gonna be up and down to make sure you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, now we're gonna focus on the corners. And before you start folding anything, I want you to note that there is a little bit of overlap here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our bone folder and we're going to push this corner over. I'm gonna lay it down to do that, and then I'm gonna bring it back up so you can see what I've done, which will push this excess over and around the corner. Okay, so I'm pressing my bone folder against my cut mat, and then I'm pulling it around to get this corner, there we go, to come around at an angle. And I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time standing up and showing you and seeing what I'm doing, so that did not go over well. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I'm pulling it down this way, and then once I've done that, I'm putting a crease so that the corner is actually starting to wrap this little bit of the height of the chipboard there. So hopefully you can see that. I know it's not very easy, but we're gonna do that on all four corners before we wrap. Okay, so that's one corner down. And I like to rotate it around so that my corner is always up in the right-hand corner. It just seems to be easier for me to work with in at that angle. Excuse me. Okay, I got one more. One more. This one's taking a little more effort, but it's happening. Okay. There we go. Okay. Now I've got all of my corners folded over this way, and then I press down so that the paper, when I say press down, so that the paper's actually wrapping around the edge of the chipboard there. So when I fold up this way, it'll be completely covered. All right, so now I'm going to do the same thing that I did with this edge. I'm gonna work it a little. This will go a lot smoother because we are working with the grain of the spine again. I mean, the grain of the paper. Okay, we've got our tape down. I'm working that into place. And get my tape off and lay it down. Again, we're going to start at the center and push out. double checking, make sure that's flat. It is. Okay, I'm going to push in the center and then work my way out. And then I'm just pushing to make sure everything is grabbing. And I'm going to give you a close-up of the corner. So here, I'm going to adjust my light just a little. Sorry for shaking the camera, but here is the corner, and so it just makes a nice, beautiful mitered edge. And remember, it goes at a funny angle here, but that's okay because most of this is going to get covered up with another piece of matte paper here. So we're going to do the same thing on the other side. And when I said funny angle, I mean it's not like a perfect miter. Okay, center and out. Center and out. Center and out. Okay, we now have a wrapped cover. Okay. So one of the things I've started doing recently is when I'm working the outside of my book is just to kind of gradually rock it back and forth. You are working with a grain of the paper, so that's helpful. But always be patient when you're working on this part because this is the, not the inside, but the outside is where it will tend to crack. If you're going to have any cracking, that's where it's going to occur. I'm just working this paper into the actual hinge here. The next thing we're going to do is lay our hinge down, but we want this to be worked in as tight as possible because we're going to have yet another layer of paper on top of this. So I'm just working it in. I'm going to pick this up. And you can feel a little bit of resistance. I'm just pushing it nice and light. And that is our 8.5 by 10.5 cover. Now I'm going to take this whole thing and set it aside while we work on the hinge. Okay, I wasn't quite prepared, so I went off and prepared this, the preliminary for the hinge. So what I started with was an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and because our pocket page is 10 inches, we need to shorten that just, I do it by 1/8 of an inch. So this is now 9 7/8 lengthwise, and 8.5 inches across. So what you're going to do is we're going to score a 1/2 inch starting at 1.5 inches and score a 1/2 inch all the way until you get to 7. So what you're going to wind up with is 1.5 inches on the left and 1.5 inches on the right, and 1/2 inch score lines between the two. And then we're going to fold it, excuse me, so that we have these peaks and valleys. These valleys are what we call a gusset, and the peaks are what are going to become the actual hinge, and then the pocket page is going to slip over the hinge to stay in place inside the book. So once you've done this, and again, we start at 1.5, then we'll score at 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, 5.5, 6, 6.5, and 7. We'll score all those, and then we'll start folding. And the first hinge will come together just like this, and then we have a gusset. Then you pinch together another mountain, and then a space or a gusset. Same thing until you get to the end. And then we're going to flip it over, and then between or in the valleys is where we're going to put our score tape. And this is called a hidden hinge, and there's lots of different tutorials on this. They all essentially wind up doing the same thing, getting you basically the same function, but people put them together a little bit differently. I just use a 1/2 inch across the board. Some people make their hinge height taller or the gusset smaller, but I just like to use a consistent 1/2 inch across the board. It makes it easy to construct, and I find that a 1/2 inch between each of the pages is a pretty good rule of thumb. But I have seen them as tight as 1/8 of an inch, and I've seen them as wide as 1 inch. So depending on how much embellishing you want to do on your pages, particularly if you're using dimensional embellishments, you may want to widen the gusset, and that is the flat space between the two hinges. All right, and once I get the tape down, we'll remove it and we'll pinch these pleats together, and you'll see the hinges start to come to life. And then after we do that, we put some additional score tape on the rest of this, and it actually gets placed inside the album. And we are almost done building an album. And once you get going on this, I think it's going to take me about an hour to get the video done, but once you get some experience, you can build an album in 40 minutes or so. And I like to, if I'm in a creative slump, sometimes I'll spend time building the base albums so that they're ready when I'm ready, and I can just reach over and grab one for a project, so that whenever I start a project, I don't have to start it from complete scratch. But that's just me. I like to have a couple in my stash at any given time, so I can get right to the designing based on the paper collection. Okay. Okay, I'll fold that last piece over. Okay, and I will show you now what it looks like. So laying it flat. So here's our the actual hinges that are standing up, and then the pocket pages will slip over each of these. So we're going to need to do a couple of different things. We're going to need to apply tape to both sides of the hinge, because that's what will hold the pocket page in place. But then we also need to cover the back of this in adhesives to adhere to the inside of the album. So I'm going to start by putting tape on the hinges themselves, and we won't pull that tape off until we're ready to put our pages in, but I'm going to go ahead and prep it. I like to keep my tape as close to the top of the hinge as possible, so that when I slip my page over, it doesn't come into the score line at all, because you don't want any of this tape exposed once you put your pocket page on. Stuff will get stuck to it. Remember, you need tape on both sides, front and back. The hinge mechanism takes probably the most amount of adhesive. So don't be surprised, it does take quite a bit. Okay. And this is something you can do after it's in the book, but I like to do it before I put it in the book, because then I can move the hinge around any way I want to make it easy. Once it's in the book, then you're dealing with this big 8.5 by 10.5 album that you're having to shuffle around. Okay, we're almost done with the hinges. Get some tape in and get it actually into the book. Oops, that's a little low. Move that up. Turn that around so I get a better view. There we go. I'm going to burnish everything because it's, again, much easier to do it outside the book than inside the book. Now it's time to get some adhesive on the back of this. And I am going to go around my edges. This can be a little challenging because you've got your hinges poking up. So there we go. Just trying to get them to all lay down in the same direction. Beautiful, beautiful. Put some tape down on the hinge itself. And then I will be using a little bit of glue when I go to attach it to the album, and that's because I want to be able to shift it around a little bit until I know it's square with the book. And you'll see what I mean in just a minute. And hopefully I'll have enough tape to get me through the hinge because it's looking tight. Okay, and you can see I'm using a lot of tape, but I think it's significant on the spine because it gets a lot of activity. Oh, just ran out. And I think I'm out of this size, so I'm gonna have to use a little bit of my 1/4 inch to get me by, but I would recommend using the same size tape across, but I'm out. So I'm not gonna stop the video for that, okay? I'm gonna burnish everything. And then I'm gonna get my glue ready. Okay, got my glue. And it'll take me a few minutes to get all the tape back off. And I'm going to pull this over. So here is where we're headed. So I've got my spine. There's the top of my album. Right now it doesn't really matter. It's not directional. This is going to lay down right here. So I know that my spine is 9 7/8 height. And this is 10.5 inches. So I'm going to look at this and eyeball it a little bit, and then I'm going to put a small pencil line down here to use as a guide when I'm putting this in, because I want to make sure that, and I'm putting my book straight on a grid line down here too. I want to make sure that my spine does not go in crooked. If it goes in crooked, all the pages will cascade crooked. So I want to make sure this goes in as straight as possible. And one of the ways I can do that is by putting a straight guideline down here. The other thing I can do to make sure that that goes in straight is to make sure that this is square. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to measure from here to here and verify that it is the same distance on the top as it is on the bottom. And that will go a long way to making sure this goes in square. And I'll show you what to do if it's not. Okay, let's see. And it is square. So when I measured this distance from here to here and here to here, it's exactly the same distance. So the likelihood that this is square is very strong. Now, what if it wasn't? What if one side was off a 1/16 of an inch? Well, there's a couple things you can do. You can either try to press it together and make sure that all your hinges are tightly pinched all the way to the bottom next to the score line, and then see if that evens it up. If it doesn't, then what you might want to do is stretch one side or the other, and then you'll wind up getting this in more straight. So with that, I'm going to stand up so I can see both edges and try to figure out where I want to put my straight line. And I think it's going to go right here. here. And it's just a light line to use as a guide. If there's anything exposed when I'm finished, I'll just erase it. I just use a pencil to do that. Okay, now I'm going to go through that painstaking process of getting all this tape off. Which is easier said than done, because it wants to stick to you. That. Got one more piece, and then I'm going to, like I said, apply some glue to give myself a little bit of time to get this placed correctly. Otherwise, this tape is so tacky, it sticks and there's no wiggling. You either have to tear it completely up or live with your placement. And I'm being pretty liberal because I want to be able to slide it. Okay. All right. I'm going to flip it over. And I'm just eyeballing the distance from this score line to the hinge on both sides to center it this way. I'm not going to measure it. You can, but I don't. I've done it enough times that I just pretty much eyeball it. So when I say that, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the this score all the way to this hinge, this score to this hinge. Is it left to right centered? And I think it is. Pretty close anyway. And I'm looking for about a 1/2 inch between so it'll match the gussets for the rest of the hinge. Okay, I'm going to stand up and take a look. And that looks pretty darn good, so I'm going to go ahead and press it in place. Okay. And then, as I had mentioned before, we wanted to work the cover into this hinge space because we have yet another layer here. All right, same thing. We're going to want to work this into the hinge. And then make sure all of this is pressed down firmly. Okay, and not to be in a hurry. You don't want it to crack. Same thing on this side. Just ease it up. Okay, there we go. You can, there's some resistance because that's a lot of paper in that hinge, so be patient when you're pulling it up. Okay. Pull that up. I'm just slowly closing it, rocking it, getting it to work its way into that, into the hinge. And there we have our book. So that's pretty exciting. We're almost done. So now we'll need to trim down 2 pieces to cover the black cardstock. And you can either cover it in black, which is what I usually do, and then use that as a mat to put something else on. Or you can, because you've got a significant border here, you can actually just apply your designer paper directly to the chipboard. Because like I said, there's so much of a mat here. You could easily do a 1/4 inch frame around any piece of paper that you laid here. I typically like to go ahead and finish it and put a black piece in here. So I'm going to trim something out for that. And set this aside for the moment. And then we're going to go ahead and, right now I'm going to go ahead and show you how to build the pocket page. So I've already constructed these pocket pages so you can get a look at what it looks like finished. And this is the side that's going to slip right over the hinge in the book. So it's going to be applied just like this. It's going to slide right over that hinge, and we'll remove the tape, and the tape is what's going to actually hold the page in place. So we're going to do that 4 times. So I've made 3 out of the 4, and I've left 1 so that we can build it together. And I'm going to give you the dimensions real quick. The dimensions are 10.5 by 8. So our pocket pages are going to be a finished pocket page of 8 by 10, but you're going to start with 10.5 because you're going to need to score a 1/2 inch to get your hinge to create the pocket. Okay, so 10.5 by 8. You'll need 2 of those, and I'm looking for my second one, and here it is. Okay, so we're going to put the tape, the scored tape sides on opposite ends. They're going to be sandwiched together just like this to make a pocket page. Okay, so here is the technique I use. I like to take a part of the tape off, just a little bit, fold it over on itself, and then I want to place this corner square to this corner. And I like to leave this tape here so that I've got some room to maneuver the sheet until I'm happy with its alignment. Okay. I'm just shifting so that the corner is closest to me where I can see exactly what's going on. And then I'm going to press it into place. And I'm going to bring it up so that you can see. So there's my first corner, and you can see it's very tight, and that's the way I want it to be. So then once I've got that, I can line up these edges because I can still torque the paper a little bit and make sure it lines up all the way down here. I'm going to use my hand to hold it in place while I pull the tape out. So another thing I like to do is I like to use this little acrylic square, and it's a little bit taller than the paper, and if I push it against the paper, I can push both sheets into this acrylic square, and it makes sure that they are perfectly lined up this way, right? Because there's something for me to push against. So I'm using that little acrylic square to make sure that these 2 edges are perfect. I'm holding it in place, and then I'm going to pull this down, pull and press, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And that is how we get to a pocket page. Okay, I'm going to do that one more time. Same thing, I'm only going to take a corner off, fold it over on itself. I'm going to use my little acrylic square to pull these sheets together and to make sure they're marrying, and they are. Press down that corner. Oops, my tape tore. I have to sneak back in here and pull out the tape again. That happens once in a while. There we go. And now I'm going to do the same thing. I want to make sure that, yeah, there we go. And I'm pulling and pressing, and I'm using my hand across the paper to try to keep it as flat as possible. I don't want too much of a bow. A little bit's okay, but not too much. And that is our pocket page. So you'll need 4 of those. And those will be applied directly to each one of the hinges inside the book. And what I had previously done in my tutorials is I've actually gone ahead and put the pages inside the book so you can see what it's like. But I'm going to leave these pages out because I find that when I'm actually designing an album, it's a lot easier to work with the pages outside. And it's also a lot less wear and tear on the cover of your album if you're not opening and closing it several hundred times getting your design paper in. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this out and then place these in here for the next time I want to do a design album, but not actually adhere them to the book until they're already finished. So they'll be set aside for the time being. So I'm going to trim these 2 pieces out and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. I've got my 2 trimmed out pieces of paper, and the cover is 8.5 by 10.5, and so I just want to be a little bit smaller than that. So these two are 8 3/8 by 10 3/8. 8 3/8 by 10 3/8. You'll need 2 of those. And those will be the liners that go just inside the cover, the front and back covers, like so. And then that gives you your finished album along with your 4 pocket pages. So that, actually it's 5 because I constructed one with you, but it'll be 4 for this album. So that is how to put together an 8.5 by 10.5 mini album using the hidden hinge and pocket page technique. So hopefully this is helpful. This is the size that I used for a couple of the albums, so you'll be able to reference this, and I'll probably create a link for it for any of the other tutorials that use this base album. So thanks for tuning in. I hope it was helpful, and be sure to stop by and see us at our shop at www.scrap_the letter N and create. Thanks again. Bye.